The BBC's released its report into the former Radio 1 and 1 Extra presenter DJ Tim Westwood, apologising for how it handled the complaints. Warren, did you see much of this report?
Yeah, I did, and it was quite damning in terms of how many times complaints were made and weren't investigated. And it seems that although I'm not sure what's going on right now with the criminal investigations, Tim Westwood, it seems the BBC did make a series of mistakes. They've admitted they could do better and are trying to put some new processes in place. If people don't know much about this story, I'd recommend they watch on iPlayer, actually, a documentary by Dan Henry, a former BBC reporter, into Tim Westwood, which involved interviewing victims who say they were, affected by him.
I mean, it's a report that's sort of been in the cupboard for quite a long time because of the criminal investigations. I think it's about 140 pages. I read the first 70 yesterday, and it's a fascinating read, and it's not something which you normally would read about. It's really interesting from a talent management perspective. They've got all the emails and conversations between producers and bosses. The person doing the report is a KC. It was an expensive report, cost 3.3 million, which is about a third of the budget of 1 Extra that Tim Westwood was on. But when you dig into the talent management side, it just kind of shows this this difficulty that we come back to all the time about big name talent and how you deal with them. And a lot of the production team and the exec producers were actually pretty good at dealing with their team who had problems with him, and he seemed to be quite a tough person obviously to work with. There's in the report, there's two elements. There's him as a working relationship and then him with other allegations. But the working report stuff is fascinating. But we always come back to this issue, don't we, of how production works with talent and the talent get away with things.
Yeah, there's a real issue regarding duty of care, always regarding contributors, staff, and then that relationship between talent, editorial, management. Getting that right is something which lots of broadcasters, not just broadcasters, production companies have got wrong in the past 5, 10, 15 years. And I'm sure people in the industry a lot longer than we've been in the industry would say things have been bad for a long period of time. So I think for the BBC, it's good they've done this report. It's bad that they've taken so long to do it. I mean, people forget that. I think Westwood hasn't been on the BBC for more than 10 years now. Yes. So it's a very, very long period of time that it's taken to get this report done. But I'm hoping that this is good news for the people who've been affected by what happened, and the BBC can move forward positively.
I mean, Chris, it's sort of another in a long line of these sorts of problems.
It reflects really badly on the industry, right? These are it was ever thus, right, that talent was put on a pedestal and allowed to behave in a way they shouldn't behave. There are, of course, there's a spectrum in all of this, right? Some of the stuff around Westwood is really sort of, if those allegations are correct, and the criminal prosecution is sort of appalling kind of stuff. And then, on the other hand, you've got talent, shouting at junior members of production staff, right? They're not the same thing. Neither of them is acceptable. I do think that there is a greater consensus now in the industry than ever before about what is and what isn't acceptable. I think people know that. The challenge with all these things is to turn the good intentions and the edicts from the top of these organisations and to make that to reality, on the studio floor or on location or whatever it might be. And how, this is the challenge facing production companies and broadcasters, how do you genuinely empower people, junior members of staff, to feel like they can come forward and say, this is not right, I don't like this is making me feel uncomfortable.
Creating a culture, isn't it? The right culture.
Precisely that. And has the industry got it right? No. It's miles away still from getting it right.
One of the bits that's quite interesting, and they refer to everybody by job titles. You have to sort of remember who was doing what when. But it looked like she had a conversation with Andy Parfitt, who was the controller of Radio 1 and had hired Tim Westwood. And it was important for him that Westwood did 1 Extra. So sort of not forced Westwood to do it, but really pushed him to do it. Therefore, he was sort of, played along a little bit because he made him do this job. Yeah. But also, he's taken to task a little bit by the KC about having a bad culture at Radio 1. And actually, a lot of Andy's sort of sell was that how he transformed the culture at Radio 1, had a really good culture. If you talk to people there, I think generally that they would agree with that. But then there's these kind of glaring holes, and you can kind of get slightly annoyed at this, but sort of acknowledges that yes, that's what the case was, and it's easy to have blind spots.
I think you've got to bear in mind that Tim Westwood was a very popular DJ. He was very well respected in that genre of music, not just in the UK, but also internationally.
Yep.
So he was, a real asset to the BBC. So having to balance the fact that he was popular, he was a great asset, he did good programming against these allegations too, which, were improving at the time, it must have been a difficult balancing act.
Yeah.